I love Star Wars and I also love video essays. So, oh, hey, girl. Okay, great. Well, Olive is joining us for a little bit. Olive, what do you have to say to the audience? Thank you so much for that contribution. Anyways, we're going to be looking at the ethics of the visual representation of women in the original Star Wars trilogy, just the first three, episodes 4 through 6. So, how does that sound? Great. I've elected not to analyze this through a formal ethical framework due to just the amount of factors that I thought would play into it. So instead, I went ahead and made a list of those factors for us to consider as we're looking at the different visual representations on screen. So, factor number one is how many women are represented in the original trilogy and to what extent. Furthermore, what do their representations compare like to the representations of men in the same films? Number two, what is being visually represented and what does this suggest to the audience about the in-universe women and also women in reality? Number three, is the representation consistent throughout the trilogy? And number four, how does the on-screen representation in Star Wars compare to the treatment of women on set for Star Wars? Before we dive into each movie individually, however, I want to go ahead and take a closer look at that first one. We'll start with a pop quiz to go ahead and test your knowledge. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to name as many women as you can from the original trilogy. Ready? Go. Okay, great. Congratulations if you named less than 5 because there are only 3 named women with speaking roles in the first 3 Star Wars. First 3 being episodes 4 through 6. These women are Princess Leia, Aunt Beru, and Mon Mothma. So if you name someone like Snai Soodles or Taryn Farr, these characters, like, yeah, they're named, but they were never named at the initial release of the films. They were instead identified through merchandise or extended universe content. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be focusing on those 3 named women with speaking roles. However, I do find the representation of the feminine Glupshitos really fascinating, so we're probably going to touch on those a little bit. Furthermore, I want to go ahead and identify what counts as representing women on screen in Star Wars. So I've gone ahead and made a little list that we can use sort of as a checkbox system. Number 1, the character identifies as a woman. Number 2, the character is represented with visual features that are considered feminine in real-world American culture. And number 3, the character uses she/her pronouns. By this criteria, characters like Leia fall under representation of women on screen, but so do characters like Snai Soodles or L337. Miss Snooty, despite being a Polowick, is designed with lipstick and emphasized eyelashes, something that is undeniably a design choice for audiences to be able to recognize her as a woman by utilizing things that are culturally considered feminine. Similarly, L337 is canonically programmed with feminine programming as opposed to masculine programmed droids like C3PO. This is represented not only through the voice actress, but also through the use of she/her pronouns when referring to the character. Are you good? She's fine. Droid gender programming in Star Wars could honestly be an entire project on its own because noticeably, if not all droids that have domestic tasks like working at restaurants or serving as luxury droids, they're made with feminine programming, whereas a lot of the droids that are for battle purposes or are considered like intelligent programming for like linguistics or medical purposes, those droids are typically programmed with masculine programming. L3's story in particular is really devastating to me, considering her journey of self-actualization, and the way it ends with her consciousness being uploaded into the Falcon, therefore her eternally being this like tool or object that Lando and Han use as a tool and like a prize. So that one's really sad to me. That's a whole other thing though. I'm going to link a really good video about it though in the description and in the corner if I can figure out how to do that. Anyways, whether or not these droid gender programming systems say more about the in-universe gender roles or about the normalization of traditional gender roles in media, I don't know. So that's just something to think about. Anyways, let's dive in, starting with episode 4, A New Hope. Originally just released as Star Wars in 1977, this film has two women characters, Princess Leia Organa, portrayed by Carrie Fisher, and Aunt Beru, portrayed by Shayla Fraser. Beru only has two scenes before she is removed from the story, and both of these scenes are at her home on Tatooine, where she lives with Luke Skywalker and his uncle Owen. Our first introduction to Beru is her pouring blue milk, sorry. Can't have people on the comments. Our first introduction to Beru is her pouring blue milk for Owen as they wait for Luke to join them at the table. Conversation between Luke and Owen begins, and Beru remains silent the entire time. We do, however, get snippets of what read to me as disapproving looks from Beru whenever Owen mentions wiping R2-D2's memory.
Tomorrow I want you to take that R2 unit to Anchorhead and have its memory erased. That'll be the end of it. It belongs to us now.
But what if this Obi-Wan comes looking for it?
He won't.
Our next and final scene with Beru begins with her preparing food and telling Owen about Luke leaving the farm early that morning. And that's it before the stormtroopers show up. So let's break that down. Hey, Dad. She's leaving me. She's leaving me just like Aunt Beru. In each of these two scenes, we see Beru performing domestic tasks at the home. In the first, she's serving her husband by pouring his drink, and in the second, she's in the kitchen preparing food. Interestingly, though, her side eyes to Owen imply that she is fully aware of Obi-Wan Kenobi's past and the past of Luke's father being a Jedi.
Oh, and he can't stay here forever. Most of his friends have gone. It means so much to him.
I'll make it up to him next year. I promise.
Luke's just not a farmer, Owen. He has too much of his father in him.
That's what I'm afraid of.
Oh my god. That line gets me every time. Because what saves Luke from the dark side and falling like his father did is his similarities to his mother. But what prevents Leia from losing the will to live like her mother and continuing to fight for what she believes in is her similarities to her father. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Anyways, back to the essay. Showcasing a woman doing domestic tasks and interacting with her husband isn't inherently a bad thing, but what makes it questionable is when it's the only thing a woman is portrayed as doing. It takes what is meant to be representation of a whole person and turns it into a two-dimensional representation of what that person is. Beru in these scenes is limited to just being a domestic woman living on a farm in an outer rim planet. Again, nothing inherently bad with that. It's just it limits the possibilities of what her character can reveal about women. Arguably, this makes her not a fully realized character in the sense that her existence is purely simplified to only doing two things and saying less than 10 lines of dialogue that are, again, only ever in response to or in reference to two male characters. But there's another piece to consider when thinking about Aunt Beru and what she represents for women, and that is her role in the story. She's not meant to be a fully realized, complex character. She's a setup for Luke's call to adventure. She's introduced to be killed off and subsequently introduced solely to motivate another character's story. She's a fridged character, the Alex DeWitt of Star Wars. So while Beru isn't necessarily a well thought out representation of women, she's not exactly meant to be. But here's what's really interesting. We have another fridged character, an Uncle Ben in the form of Uncle Owen. Beru's counterpart in her scenes also only ever appear in those scenes. Visually speaking, we don't ever actually see Owen completing any tasks despite him discussing the difficulties of the harvest with Luke. Considering this, you could say that Owen has the same level of simplicity that Beru has. This comparison to her counterpart makes her lack of depth seem less problematic. Had Owen gone through a character arc and had more of that emotional depth, then yeah, it would have been a little weird for Beru to have nothing, but that's not the case here. Instead, the partnership and simplicity makes it equal between the genders. The driving force of the lack of depth for these characters isn't their gender identity, it's their role in the wider story. Because of this, I think that while Aunt Beru isn't great representation, she's also not bad representation, because she's not really representation to begin with. She's more so a puzzle piece along with Owen to a wider narrative trope. But the distinction is that this time it's both a man and a woman being used to mobilize a man's story. Leia is different. Arguably one of the most iconic women. Excuse you? Oh my god. Someone needs a new kyber crystal. Okay. Arguably one of the most iconic women in all of sci-fi, Leia appears in all three movies of the original trilogy and goes through some really interesting moments of representation for women. Picture it. It's 1977. You're watching this new movie and a princess shows up. But what's that? She has a blaster and she's fighting the bad guys? Excuse the lack of academic terminology, but that's pretty darn cool. Star Wars, of course, isn't the first to do this. Just 10 years earlier, almost 10, Barbarella was coming out. But where A New Hope sets itself apart is that the first appearance of Leia on screen is focused on her strength as a member of the Rebel Alliance. We see her avoiding stormtroopers, fighting back, and even though she is eventually captured, it's not without a fight. And we soon learn that she had the forethought to send a message for Obi-Wan Kenobi and also to give R2-D2 the Death Star plans. Meanwhile, Barbarella's first on-screen appearance heavily revolves around the reveal of a woman in a spacesuit and the sexual appeal she has for the male gaze while she's in zero gravity. So, yeah. Full disclosure, I didn't watch that movie, so it may be more progressive than my initial reactions to what I've seen from it, but you tell me. Before we continue with A New Hope, let's talk about Leia's character design. Star Wars notably draws inspiration from various other sources, whether they're mythological, historical, or from film and literature, and this goes the same for its character designs. Many interpret Leia's style as being similar to Hopi women, and George Lucas has specifically cited turn of the century Mexico as being one of the things he drew inspiration from, most likely referencing Adelitas from the Mexican Revolution, such as Clara de la Rocha. This inspiration from actual women revolutionaries is combined with the stylizations of the fantasy genre, including those of Frank Frazetta and John Berkey. Star Wars is also well known for its color symbolism, oftentimes relating the dark side of the Force with darker colors and the light side of the Force with light colors. Given this, it's not unreasonable to assume that Leia's white and silver outfit is representing the notions of goodness, elegance, grace, purity, innocence, notions that feel fit for a princess. This further juxtaposes the moments where we see her being an active member of the rebellion. She's not just a regal and elegant princess, she is also a fierce and intimidating combatant. Despite her femininity, she is strong and capable, sometimes to the point of in-universe characters suggesting that it would overshadow her regal kindness. Quick side note, the notion of goodness connecting to the color white does not apply when it comes to the stormtroopers. I would instead argue that the simplicity of their costumes and their uniforms is meant to establish a blank slate and emphasize this idea of like a collective mass of force, not that kind of force, but might that the Empire can then push its own ideas onto. The stormtroopers, despite being individuals, they're not clones. They are now instead one mass of people. They're a body that moves for the Empire. Because of this, their design relies on simplicity through the color white to easily imply this to the audience. I think it serves more so as a purpose to suggest a lack of individualism within an imperial state. So that's that. In A New Hope, we frequently get frames of Leia being surrounded by men, but not in a way that feels threatening. Instead, the framing of these scenes seem to suggest power within Leia rather than the men. When Leia is first brought to Vader, she is surrounded by 4 stormtroopers, but all of them are cheating out, facing closer to him than they are to her. Other shots of the same scene reveal that they're actually spread out a little bit more, so that way the visual focus is on Vader and Leia. They're the 2 forces in the scene. The stormtroopers are just world building at that point, I feel like. This scene is notably a really cool standoff between Vader and Leia, but it is different from other standoffs that we have with Vader and other characters, as opposed to when like Luke is having his visions of Vader, it's not frightening. It's instead like this real world standoff between two people who don't like each other. It's black and white, and the focus is only on the two individuals. Sorry, I went off script there for a second. I have a script here and I'm going off of it, but instead, Leia meeting with Vader in this is not represented as something that's terrifying for her. It's represented as something that she just kind of has to deal with. She holds her ground and makes direct eye contact with Vader, or like as much eye contact that you can make with him. So when you compare that to the other representations of one-on-ones with Vader, it's kind of impressive. Then when Luke opens the door to her cell, Leia is just relaxing in a prison cell. This is meant to serve as further characterization for her, emphasizing her collected and calm demeanor in the face of being imprisoned as a political enemy of the imperialistic state who's about to be executed. And she's just laying there. Here, Leia shifts into a sassy, near sexual pose, but it's not for the pleasure of what she assumes is one of her captors. Instead, it's to defy the situation and what is expected of her in the moment. She's not afraid, she's not cowering in fear. She's serving, you know? Like, does that make sense? This specific moment reminds me of the trend of reclining nudes throughout different periods of art history, but particularly the pieces that aim to subvert that trend. For example, Manet's painting Olympia and Titian's Venus of Urbino. Anyways, both of them depict what should be a traditional reclining nude, but with the difference that the woman who's reclining is making eye contact or staring back at the audience that's gazing at her. This is not unlike how Leia is staring down the stormtrooper who just opened her cell. Vast contextual differences, but still, it was something that I kind of saw visual similarities in and thought would be cool to mention. Leia is, however, the only woman in the film following Aunt Beru's absence. This doesn't include the background or side characters like the Tanika sisters at the cantina on Mos Eisley, or Omi the Dianaga. Sorry, I had to look at that one. Had to look at my notes for that one. Because yes, the garbage chute alien is feminine, and she has a really sad story, actually. So I'm a survivor. Except she dies in the Death Star explosion in the Battle of Yavin. Whoopsies. There are no women in the Imperial meetings, which does make sense even out of universe considering the treatment of women in fascist regimes. And Leia appears to be the only woman on the base at Yavin 4. Of course, through deleted scenes and extended universe content, we do get more women that are identified and expanded upon, but at the time, audiences watching this in the 70s would not have known that. And honestly, most people watching the movies now. Point being, at the time of release, and also now, most audiences will count Leia as being the only woman present at the rebellion in A New Hope. So if Leia is a complex and three-dimensional woman, but the only woman, is it fair to call this ethical visual representation? To decide, I think we need to consider what kind of expectations Leia puts on audiences for how women should behave, and also how these expectations compare to the expectations for men that the movie creates. Ultimately, Leia is not just a princess. She is a political representative in the Imperial Senate and also a member of the rebellion. But they don't know that. They know that. They know that. That's why they got her. She is forthcoming and active in battle, going as far as taking other characters' weapons and expressing her annoyance at their incompetence. Despite this strength, though, she's still caring. She may not be the nicest person, but she's kind, comforting others when they are grieving and fighting tooth and nail for what is just and fair. If Leia's representation dictates what a good woman is, then Star Wars is saying that a good woman is kind and strong. But what's great is that the men in this film are characterized just the same. Each character, of course, has their flaws. Leia is short tempered, Han is selfish, and Luke will let his emotions drive him to the point of fault at times. But they are each made to be heroes because of the ultimate care and dedication that they have for each other and for the rebel cause. Both the men and women are considered good in Star Wars if they are kind and willing to fight for what's right. For that reason, I would say that Episode 4, A New Hope, has ethical visual representation of women for the representation that it does provide. Because more would be nice. We're talking about Empire Strikes Back now, Olive. Do you have thoughts on that one? It's also one of my favorites, Olive. I'm so glad you said that. No, don't eat that. Don't eat that. No, no. Sit. High five. This is not related to the project. I'm sorry. So I love Empire Strikes Back, so this is gonna pain me to say it, but I feel like it's a little regressive in comparison to A New Hope. I know. I'm not going to be spending too much time on Empire Strikes Back solely because Return of the Jedi, I have a lot to say about that one. So we'll just go over like the main points and I will try my best not to go on tangents. In Empire Strikes Back, the majority of Leia's arc, scratch that, not even the majority, her arc is from going from denying her feelings from Han to accepting and admitting them to him. That's her arc in Empire. That's it. Now, this is very similar to how Aunt Beru is represented in Star Wars, and the fact that the arc itself is not bad. It's not a bad arc to have. In fact, I would argue that for Leia and the overall narrative of the story, it is one that needs to happen. Not necessarily like the romance part of it, even though I love the romance of it. I love Han and Leia so much. The necessity of it, though, I think comes from the emotional maturity that it encourages in the characters of Star Wars. For the story to evolve in emotional maturity, so do the characters. And so I think that having this arc is something that is necessary for the overall arc to evolve as a character and to grow from what we see in A New Hope. Leia does have some emotional maturity. She is closed off, she is protective, and she is defensive, if anything. Um, and that kind of manifests itself by being mean sometimes. And so having the emotional maturity to have a romantic connection with someone and admit to it without feeling shame is something that I think is a sign of maturity in Leia. I'm keeping that in. I'm keeping that blooper in. I'm not cutting that. That said, though, Leia's role in Empire Strikes Back is not as big as it was in A New Hope, it feels like. Now, don't get me wrong, there are several important things that Leia does in this movie besides the romance plot of it. She flies the Falcon for the first time. She has a connection through the Force with Luke at the end of the movie. She distrusts Lando and knows that something is off. So those are all wildly important things, but it's kind of limited to that. Plus, of course, the battles in the hallway of Cloud City with the stormtroopers and stuff like that. That obviously has to happen in Star Wars. And also, as we've established, it's Leia. That's what she does. She is active in combat. And so she is active in combat at the end of this movie. On top of this, she also continues her streak of being a leader in the rebellion. In the last movie, we see her being up towards the front during the presentations of the Death Star plans, and in this movie, we see her instructing an entire team of pilots. This particular moment is one of the most redeeming qualities of the representation of Leia in Empire Strikes Back, because here she is, very, very similar to when we saw her surrounded by stormtroopers and confronting Darth Vader. She is once again surrounded by characters that are solely men. This time, however, she is not on the defensive, not on the offensive. She is at home with the rebels. And so she is in charge, leading them and telling them what to do. I really love this part because the men are not ignoring her. They're listening to her because they're getting their directions from her. And they don't have any kind of resistance to that idea. Instead, it's very clear from the framing of this shot and the way the actors are presenting their characters that these pilots trust Leia in her decisions and her instructions on what they need to do in battle, and they are attentively listening to her. Leia is, of course, as always, exuding confidence in her ability to lead, and this is consistent with what we see from her character in A New Hope. Beyond this, though, that's kind of the most that we get to see Leia do. Give instructions to pilots. she goes on the Falcon with Chewie, C-3PO, and Han, and she goes to Cloud City. She's distrusting of Lando. She ends up escaping after she tells Han that she loves him, and then she gets to save Luke with the help of Lando and Chewie, and that's pretty much it. Again, not bad, not bad, but it certainly feels a little less crazy than the things that she was doing in A New Hope. And by crazy, I mean in the sense of like, she's running around, she's got a blaster, she's running around, she's yelling at Han, be more important, someone help me, why are you guys not doing anything? You know, like that's like, woo, high action stuff. This feels a little bit less high action in the sense of Leia, despite her still being in the action sequences. So, I don't know. Another thing I couldn't help but notice while watching this is that Leia asks a lot of questions throughout this movie. And I'm not saying it in the sense of like referring to when she's like, oh, he was trying to help, wasn't he? Chewie, you know, about Lando at the end of the movie, you know? Like not her sarcastic quips and stuff like that, but more so when she's asking questions about like, what is that? As a script writing technique, these feel like the scriptwriters giving opportunities for the men to answer the questions rather than showcasing Leia's knowledge. She's instead kind of a conduit of, okay, someone asked a question. Now I, the male character, can answer it and give an explanation for the audience. Not necessarily visual representation, but the script writing and the language used in the dialogue does have that mutualistic relationship with the visuals that are presented on screen. They interact with each other, they're not exclusive. So while she's asking these questions, she's sitting behind Chewie, she's sitting behind Han. She's not in the front of the Falcon, she's behind the men and asking questions for them to then provide answers to. And again, it's not something that's entirely bad because this isn't the only thing. As we've already discussed, we see her do a lot of things that are consistent with her character and maintain that spirited independence that she has. There is also the element, though, that if they didn't have moments like that and they only ever had her providing the answers and her doing all the action sequences, that it would start to feel like she was a bit of a Mary Sue. We, of course, saw this in response to the sequel trilogy with people hating on the character of Rey and then hating on anyone who defended the character, hated anyone who liked the character in any kind of semblance. What I'm trying to say is that by having these moments where Leia isn't perfect and doesn't have all the answers, they kind of make her more of a realistic person to watch. It'd be like if instead of having to deal with his bad luck all the time, Han was confident and smart and witty and also successful all the time. Like if he was able to get through that asteroid fleet like no trouble at all, that'd be a little weird, right? It's kind of like a little iffy. But looking at our factors that we've established in terms of ethics of visual representation, her representation is largely consistent with what we've seen. Her characterization through the visuals remains the same Leia that we have seen from the previous movie. The only difference is that this time we are expanding on her emotional capabilities and what that means for the relationship to other characters. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Leia is pretty much the only women we get to see represented in Empire Strikes Back besides Torrin Farr or the women at Cloud City. And so Empire Strikes Back kind of falls into this similar kind of conclusion as A New Hope, where it's not perfect. Like, it's not 11 out of 10 representation of women because there's not a lot of women in it. But what we are given isn't bad. It's pretty good for 1980. And so I think my final conclusion for the ethics of visual representation of women in Episode 5 Empire Strikes Back would be pretty good. Could be better. Not as good as A New Hope. Did you hear that? Was that good? We did it. We finally made it to our third named woman with a speaking role. Thank you, George Lucas. In Return of the Jedi, Mon Mothma is finally introduced as the Rebel Alliance leader. Similar to Leia in A New Hope, she is dressed from head to toe in white and silver, giving her a very elegant and regal look. This, combined with her calm and collected demeanor during the briefing before the Battle of Endor, gives her the sense of a natural-born leader. She is standing front and center of the briefing room, making sure that everyone is listening to her, and they are. Very similar, once again, to Leia in Empire Strikes Back when she is giving instructions to the rebel pilots. Mon Mothma transfers the floor over to General Ackbar, and that's pretty much it. That's really all she does in this film, but pretty good first appearance for her, I think. Of course, Mon Mothma is later expanded on lore-wise with things like Andor, the TV show. So she has a lot more depth to her than just this appearance, but yeah. I don't really know what else to say about it. It's hard to say a lot about Mon Mothma's appearance in this movie because there's not much of an appearance. Like, it's only 1 minute of screen time. So there's not a lot of conclusions to draw from just this. So, pro from this appearance is that we finally have another woman in Star Wars. Yay! Yay, George Lucas! Yay, feminist king. But the con is that it's not much. It's a minute of screen time. Maybe like a minute 14 seconds. So, but for the minute that we do have Mon Mothma in this movie for, it's pretty good characterization of her, and I would argue that it's ethically good visual representation, even if that representation is only on screen for 1 minute. And this is where things get tricky. This is where things get tricky because people say there's the dark side of the Force, there's the light side of the Force, there's no gray. Really? Really? I feel like Star Wars is pretty gray if you ask me. It's like a 2-hour long movie. It's 120 minutes. You had like 119 others that you could have used too. Now that we've discussed Mon Mothma and Return of the Jedi, it's time to discuss Leia. So here's the thing with Return of the Jedi Leia. Where do I start? The first time that we see Leia in Return of the Jedi, we don't know that it's her because she's disguised as an Ubi's bounty hunter. Fun fact, she is specifically impersonating a bounty hunter by the name of Boushh, who is male. She's disguised herself, she's gone in, she's infiltrating the palace, she's speaking a different language because she's bilingual now, and she's saving Han. Snaps, snaps, she's saving Han, and we love that. What's interesting about this disguise is the fact that her gender is specifically hidden.
He agrees!
At this point, it's only like 20 minutes into the movie, but everything that we've seen in Jabba's palace suggests that men and women are treated differently. Pretty much any life form in Jabba's palace that reads as female is wearing scantily clad clothing. But then Leia and Han are captured, and the next time that we see Leia is in the infamous bikini outfit. Another side note, originally this costume was referred to as Leia's slave girl costume or her slave outfit, and even on merchandise there would be like toy figurines of Leia in this with the chain wrapped around her neck, and it would be called Jabba's prisoner. Not Leia, Jabba's prisoner. Huh? With the history and trauma that comes with the word slave or slavery, this was changed, however, to then make it the Hutt Slayer costume, or just the gold bikini is sometimes is what it's referred to as. I'm pretty sure they also changed the name of Boba Fett's ship. Hold on. Yeah, originally Boba Fett's ship was named Slave One, and it's still sometimes called that, but mostly it's canonically referred to just as Boba Fett's starship. Even though this is a project regarding the visual representation, I do think, though, that the language that the franchise uses is important, and so at the time of release of the movie, it was called her slave outfit. And now this next point is very prevalent in the prequel series, but it's still there in the original trilogies. It's just not something that's really like addressed or like touched on literally like in the script and things like that. But enslavement is something that happens in the Star Wars universe very frequently. The Outer Rim planets especially are plagued with it because, one, the Republic wasn't doing anything about it, and then the Empire obviously isn't going to do anything about it. So there's just not any like control over preventing it at all in the Outer Rims. And where's Tatooine? Where's Jabba's palace? And so now the discussion about a visual representation of Leia and women in general goes into this larger conversation of, is it ethically correct and right to portray violence against women or enslavement on screen? And if so, where is the line? Is there a line? And there's a lot of points to be made, but I think with this specific example of in the Star Wars universe, it really boils down to, how is it depicted? Is it depicted as something that is okay or even just, or is it depicted as something vile and morally reprehensible? This instance in particular leans towards the latter. Jabba is literally portrayed as being disgusting and horrific. Jabba was originally going to be a human being, hence the line in New Hope where Han says, "You're a wonderful human being." But they changed that, and he's a literal alien slug. He's disgusting. He is portrayed as monstrous, and so the acts that he commits are then implied to the audience to also be monstrous. So using that logic, this representation of enslavement and violence should be considered ethical because it is portraying it as morally reprehensible. Right? Right? Let's hear what Carrie Fisher has to say.
But I believe George Lucas did kind of insist, rather ungallantly, that you needed to lose a bit of weight for Star Wars this time.
This time, too, they hire part of me. They hire like 80% of me, and they say, get rid of that extra 20.
Okay.
And nearly naked.
Nearly naked, which is not a, style choice for me.
But why was it so softcore S&M B&D?
I couldn't tell you that. It wasn't my choice. When he showed me the outfit, I thought he was kidding. And it made me very nervous.
Leia was written not to be saying anything in the scenes, which she didn't feel fit the character. And I agree. In A New Hope, and even in Empire Strikes Back, which we already discussed is not as progressive as A New Hope, Leia's very vocal. If she has the material for a sarcastic quip, she's gonna say it. And she's incredibly passionate about what is considered just and what is considered fair, but here, she doesn't get to say anything.
When we first rehearsed it, they're brought in front of Jabba, they talk to Jabba, Jabba talks to Harrison and Mark, and then they're led off. They never say, "Hey, how are you?" So as they were being led off, I said in the rehearsal, "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine, seriously." Which I thought they should have kept in there. Because it was like, where am I in all this? Sure, they're going to be digested for 2,000 years, but I have to stay with the slug with the big tongue.
And they would cut those lines from any of the takes they did. And that's why in the film, we see the chain that is around Leia's neck occasionally be yanked. It's to prevent her from speaking. Because Carrie felt that if Leia couldn't say anything in the scene, there should at least be a reason. Carrie also says that they didn't want any lines showing on her stomach, so she had to sit up as straight as possible to prevent anything from showing.
And they wouldn't let me, they had to sit very straight because I couldn't have lines in the side on my sides, like a little crease. No creases were allowed. So I just sit very, very rigid straight.
So do you think there's something Fay Ray King Kong about that scene?
Yeah, but what redeems it is that I get to kill him.
Yeah. So
which was so enjoyable.
Did you see that as like female empowerment?
Oh, absolutely. I sawed his neck off with that chain that I killed him with. I really relished that because I hated wearing that outfit and sitting there rigid straight, and I couldn't wait to kill him.
And so when you watch Return of the Jedi and you watch Leia save Han and then get captured and then put in this slave costume and chained up, and then they end up escaping and she kills Jabba with the exact same chains that he put her in, there's a poetic sense of ironic justice, and yet at the same time, I can't help but look at that and think, but Carrie Fisher didn't want to be doing that in the first place. And so I think the ethical dilemma of this boils down to, can the visual representation happen? Can the narrative points of the story that they're wanting to highlight happen? All while also making sure that the actress is comfortable on set. Because as it stands, that wasn't the case with Return of the Jedi. And so I think I have to say that the visual representation of women in Return of the Jedi was not ethical. I think that Return of the Jedi is a good reminder to not only filmmakers but storytellers in general that the representation that they're putting on screen is important, but then of course so is the actual behavior behind the scenes. And I think that this is a trend that we kind of see frequently in the entertainment industry. So I think it serves as a good reminder also to audiences to stay vigilant and be informed on like what's happening and to like make opinions about it. Anyways, I recognize that this video is getting to be pretty long, and I still have to edit it. So, which is like my favorite part of making videos is editing. So it'll be fine, but it'll be fine. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe you learned something new. Maybe you didn't. And maybe you're my professor watching this and you're thinking, wow, Piper, this was such a great project. This was amazing. I hope you're thinking that. Either way, I look forward to hearing your feedback and making improvements as I continue my studies in media. Thanks.